This is a historic moment. This is the moment that I think everyone will remember as Joe Biden's total failure, the president of the United States, having a Saigon moment, right? The similarities between what's happening right now in Afghanistan and what happened in Vietnam are truly remarkable. And we need to talk about this and we need to call it out. I don't care. You may not believe that the U.S. should be bothering in anybody else's business. And I understand that and I empathize with that. We're going to talk about that because, gosh, it cost us $1 trillion. But nonetheless, you got to be smarter about how you get out of a situation once you are in. And what this administration has just done is truly unforgivable. Hello, everyone. I'm Trish Regan. Welcome to the Trish Regan Show. We're going to get to that in a moment. But first, a word from one of our sponsors. I believe so wholeheartedly in the importance of the individual and the importance of the individual taking care of oneself and one's family. And this is one of the reasons why I consider life insurance to be a very important part of anybody's portfolio, right, in terms of their investments. But it's hard. I get it. And you need an expert for something like this. So I want to tell you about a company I would recommend, Select Quote. It's been around for over 35 years. They have a lot of experience in this. They've helped more than 2 million families find insurance, which is very important. Select Quote comparison shops, highly rated insurance companies, Prudential, Banner Life, Mutual of Omaha, others to impartially find you the best possible rate. Their technology quickly matches your individual needs with the best insurance company to find your best policy. You'd be surprised how affordable a policy really can be. And they have free quotes. So you can go online and do this. Don't put it off another day. You want to go to selectquote.com and within minutes, you're going to have your free quote. That's selectquote.com, selectquote.com. They shop, you save. And again, insurance is so important for every family right now. But back to something else that's really important, and that's our international security. And given what has just happened with Joe Biden, given what he has been willing to risk, he's effectively put us in a really vulnerable spot. And I say that because, let's not forget how Al-Qaeda started, right? Al-Qaeda started because it was able to cement itself in a pretty lawless place, Afghanistan. And the results were catastrophic. So now the Taliban's going to be back in business. And the Taliban doesn't care, right? Taliban doesn't care who's actually in the country, who's not. And so we run the risk now that Al-Qaeda, ISIS, you name it, any terror group can exist there because we're no longer there to watch things. Now you may say, okay, you know what? We don't have the energy, the time, the money, the ability to continue doing this. Really, it should be something that NATO has taken on. By the way, we leave, NATO leaves, everyone leaves, right? As soon as the U.S. leaves. But while we may have wanted to leave, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have. In fact, that was one of the positions of the Trump administration, that we needed to get out. And they actually wanted to be out by August 31st of this month. However, when you're getting out, you've got to do so in a logical, methodical way that puts fewer lives at risk. Joe Biden just a week ago said, we're not going to have a, Vietnam Saigon moment with the helicopter on top of the embassy trying to get everyone out. But guess what? We had none other than a Saigon moment with the helicopter on top of the embassy trying to rescue Americans and get them out of there, embassy personnel, before Kabul fell. So the Taliban has been marching through all of Afghanistan. We leave. The intel department tells us, you've got 3 months. 3 months until Kabul falls. Well, that was like a week ago. Someone should have seen this coming. In fact, actually, the generals did. The generals warned Joe Biden that exactly this would happen. And they said, you know what, you ought to keep 2,500 troops there because you don't want the chaos to ensue. But what did Joe Biden do? He apparently just stared him down. In fact, if you look at some of the leftists that are praising him right now, they're saying, he showed courage. He stood up to his generals. Yeah, and you know what? Little girls are going to get sold into slavery as a result of this. Women are no longer going to be able to hold jobs, no longer going to be educated as a result of this. Now, again, you may say, look, it's not our business. They're a screwed up place. Good luck to them. But after being there since October of 2001, don't we owe it to somebody, somewhere, to do this in a more organized fashion? How is Joe Biden going out there just saying, see ya, yanking everybody out, and then putting, by the way, Americans at risk, American lives at risk? I'm not one who believes you need to be involved in every single conflict. And I think that we should be really thoughtful about how these conflicts affect America, right? Because we ought to think about America first. Yeah, that's actually a policy that we should be thinking through. But simultaneously, you can't have had a certain policy in place for 2 decades and then rip the rug right out from under people. It didn't take a lot. It wouldn't have taken a lot to have made sure that this was done in an orderly fashion. And instead, frankly, we look foolish. I don't care. We can look foolish, whatever. But we do look foolish right on the world stage, especially when we were saying, it's going to take months. Everybody's going to have time to leave. And it turns out, no, it's not going to take months. And we had to send the helicopter in that big Saigon moment. So there was a way to do this and a way not to do this. And Joe Biden showed his naivete, along with Secretary of State Blinken. The complete naivete to think that somehow this would just all be hunky-dory. It's not. And we have put a lot of people at risk, including our own people. Not to mention, you think about the 2,300 soldiers that died over there in Afghanistan and all the people that were wounded in Afghanistan. And now we're like, what was it for? We couldn't figure out a way to help that country get back on its feet without us being there. Shouldn't that be the goal, right? To make them, the Afghanis, be reliant on themselves? We couldn't figure that out. And now we're like, see you later. That's not the way it should work, because it now leaves us very vulnerable to other terror groups coming in and having a hospitable place from which to operate. This was the problem with Syria, right? The caliphate was able to establish itself in Syria and launch all kinds of heinous things on the rest of the world. And so we should be protecting ourselves against that. It's not that hard. And the idea that somehow he's saying, it's not our problem. Actually, it sounds very much like Donald Trump if you think about it, right? Because he said exactly that same thing. But Joe Biden's now saying this. It's not our problem. And yet, instead of actually coming up with a strategy to get out and help the people to help themselves, he's leaving behind utter, total chaos. And you know what? That's on him. And it's so preventable. And therefore so wrong in every way, shape, or form. Everybody should remember this moment in timing. He's not even a year in. And we're dealing with crazy inflation, a la 1970s, and that Saigon moment. He actually said, can you believe this, a week ago, there will be nothing like Saigon, nothing like Vietnam. There won't be a helicopter on top of the roof. And yet, there was the helicopter on top of the roof. So I encourage everyone not to forget about this. I encourage you all to remember that image, imprint it in your mind, and think about, who is this that's running the country? Why would he do something so poorly thought out? For a political point? Because he said he would end Afghanistan. He wants to end Afghanistan. He's still got, 3.5 years? He had time, but he chose to do this now in a way that politically, I would argue, is in fact suicidal. There's another guy out there waiting in the wings who's had a very good track record in Florida, who went to Yale Law School and actually was in the JAG program in Fallujah. That would be none other than Governor Ron DeSantis out of Florida. And I'll tell you this, Politically speaking, this is a heck of a thing to be able to run on now, because you can see the comparison taking place, right? You can see the commercials writing themselves right now with Joe Biden saying it's not going to be Saigon. And then all of a sudden you see the helicopters. They can run those shots, from the past and the present right next to each other. The other thing they can talk about at length is the inflation issue, which it brings us to a real problem. Another real problem that we're trying to cope with. And I urge everybody to really think about how they're going to protect themselves, because inflation is real. Inflation is happening. 7.8% the other day on the producer price index. We've got 5.4% of an increase in consumer prices. The producer prices, which, by the way, gets transferred eventually to consumers, that was an all-time record. So we've got record-breaking inflation data. We've got us pulling out shamefully out of Afghanistan. And we've got the 1970s Jimmy Carter environment all over again. So Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis is going to look pretty good, right, in comparison. An economy that stayed open, an economy that continued to thrive. And by the way, a guy who knows what was at stake in Afghanistan. It's pretty shameful when you think about it. And again, I get back to this, just so preventable. And the fact that he wasn't willing to take the time or sit everybody down and come up with a strategy to think this one through and do it right. I just ask, how can he be the President of the United States? How can the Secretary of State be the Secretary of State? And not think through all implications. I get it. Nobody ever said they were smart. They're really proving how stupid they are. Thank you so much for listening. I want to encourage you to go to my website, trishintel.com. Make sure you sign up. Make sure you sign up for the newsletter, because it's very important we're able to stay in touch. There are some people in the Biden administration that don't like what I'm talking about right now. I want to encourage you to go and listen to the entire podcast. Of course, on Apple iTunes and on Spotify, you can get it there. Do subscribe to this channel. Give the video a thumbs up. And I will be right back here again with you tomorrow. We have a lot to discuss. Thanks so much, everyone.